Today, I want to talk about trans in sports. And the reason I want to talk about this is it's something that I find as a huge issue. And the reason why is because I've done sports for pretty much my entire life. Growing up, I played sports, basketball, t-ball, soccer. I ran in high school and a little bit in college. And so the problem that I find with the argument about trans in sports, it essentially comes down to people who have never actually participated in sports screaming about how there should be inclusivity within them without actually having participated in sports. And the biggest issue is having men advocating for essentially what is men going into women's sports. So what I want to do is I want to review this show last week tonight. I used to watch them a lot back in the day, but then they kind of went down a dark rabbit hole where they essentially would have, a funny episode about a mascot, and then they would throw in Orange Man Bad, and they basically just got Trump derangement syndrome, and they would just bash on essentially the right in a story that has nothing to do with politics. And so that's where I just kind of threw my hands up and I said, I'm kind of done with this. Didn't watch it for a few years, but now I go in because I'm kind of a masochist and because I like hearing both sides' arguments. And again, I will firmly plant myself on the, trans athletes / men should not be competing in women's sports, but I want to hear what the other side has to say and if there's anything logical. So I wanted to watch this and see what arguments were made and provide my response to those. So let's take a watch and then I can dive into some of their arguments and my thoughts on them. Just as a really quick heads up, I just wanted to let anyone watching this know that I actually created the video, had it ready to go, and apparently HBO thinks that their content is so great that they have placed copyright restrictions on it. So instead of being able to air to you the original propaganda that has been released, I have taken the liberty of creating my own version of it. That way I'm able to still bring you the original content and what was said, as well as my reactions to it. Hopefully you find my version of the original John Oliver content entertaining. It did take quite a bit more effort and time to put this together, but hopefully it's worth it. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of the video. We're actually going to start with our main story this week, and it concerns an absolute fixation of the right, because even as the markets crashed in the wake of Trump's tariffs, Fox News spent a lot of time on this.
A women's fencer is defending her decision to take a knee to protest her trans opponent despite getting disqualified for her forfeit.
A female fencer who's devoted years of her life to the sport was just disqualified.
This is the civil rights issue of the hour, women's sports.
Here's a story that
And just as a quick point to what I was saying earlier about how he would just interject politics into stuff that doesn't really, I don't really understand why he's doing it, but this segment is supposed to be on trans in women's sports, and he jumps into the tariffs. And I understand he's trying to make a point that they're fixated on this, but at the same time, just make your statement about trans. Why are we including the tariff component of it? And the other thing that I'll say about just this specific part of it is that the reason people in general transfix on this kind of a thing is because, in my opinion, it's a sign of a deeper, I'll call it lunacy for lack of a better word, that the left participates in, where they essentially, I don't know how anyone could possibly argue that men should be competing in women's sports. And again, I'll get into that further, but I think that's why people are so fixated on this issue, is because the common sense take is that you have to be mentally unstable to think that this is a good idea.
everybody's going to be interested in. A female fencer stands up for fairness in women's sports.
Wait, that's the story everyone's going to be interested in? Are you sure about that? The story about fencing? And not the one that's caused the stock ticker in the corner of your screen to go bright red like an inflamed hemorrhoid? Also, I challenge those anchors to tell me one thing about fencing besides that Lindsay Lohan did it against herself in The Parent Trap. I don't think you can do it. And that's a fair point. I don't think they know anything about fencing, but again, that's a misdirection. It's not actually about fencing. It's about trans in sports. So, trying to go after this one little fringe part of why people are fixated on the topic is a misdirection and is not actually being intellectually honest about why people are upset about the issue and why it's garnering news. The issue of trans athletes has become very important to conservatives in general and Donald Trump in particular. He talked about it at length in his address to Congress and signed an order titled Keeping Men Out of Women's Sports, which promised to rescind all funds from educational programs that allowed trans women and girls to compete. And at the signing ceremony, he ad-libbed the creepiest compliment possible.
We're defending the rights and safety and pride of the American people, including our great, great, great female athletes. What athletes you are, too, tell you. And, I'm not allowed to say this politically. It could end my career. They're really beautiful people. These are beautiful people. But like everything else, it's a little bit different today. You're not allowed to say that because if you call a woman or a girl beautiful, that's the end of your career. But let's take a chance on it, Mike. Let's take a chance.
Okay, to be completely fair to Trump, I will say his understanding of women's issues is comparable to his understanding of foreign policy, domestic policy, trade, the economy, the concept of consent, human empathy, and all but one of his children's names. And again, another misdirection. Yes, okay, what he said was kind of weird, but that's just his rambling style, in my opinion. That's just par for the course with him. So again, we're trying to talk about trans in sports, but now we're misdirecting to the manner in which Trump talks. Okay. Donald Trump leads every conversation with a psychosexual energy that makes the White Lotus look like the Teletubbies. Oh, I'm sorry. Did the incest storyline bother you? Donald Trump joked about dating his own daughter on The View. He said that on a fucking morning show. At least White Lotus has the decency to air in the evenings right here on the Incest Network. Trump's order has already prompted the NCAA to institute a ban on trans athletes participating in women's sports, but he's not done. He's also trying to pull $175 million in funding from UPenn for allowing one trans athlete to compete 3 years ago. And when Maine indicated it would resist this ban, he threatened to cut off all federal funding, despite the whole state apparently having just 2 trans girls total competing in girls' sports. 2! And my issue with this is that if a boy or man is allowed to participate in sports against females, they are going to perform better and have, as a placing result, a much better outcome than they would if they're participating against other boys. And so them being able to participate at a national level, then that impacts more than just Maine. And if you get to a world where this is completely allowed, then you could see the entire podium or the top finishers all being male. And it only takes a few of these instances. So to imagine that these 2 people, transgender, they were in the same sport. Well, now if they go on the national level and they're beating all the girls, well, then now you have first and second place, and now only one female can participate or can place in the top 3, which is generally considered to be, the most prestigious. So the problem is that even a relatively small amount of individuals can have an outsized impact on the rest of the field. And I know you might be thinking, okay, but in Maine, 2 kids is like half the kids, right? But it's actually not. They've got more. This issue is an obsession for Republicans. Last year, they spent over $116 million just on TV ads featuring trans athletes. And $116 million, this is kind of a disingenuous argument because it sounds like a lot, but if you look into how much pharma, big food, these type of industries are putting into advertising, it just completely blows away 116 million. We're talking billions of dollars. So I don't view it as a very salient argument. Again, it sounds like a lot, but in reality, it's a minuscule number when it comes to advertising budgets. And the relentless focus on this over the years has had a meaningful impact, with one poll showing more than 6 in 10 adults said trans girls and women should not be allowed to compete in girls and women's sports, including high school and youth levels. And that just proves my point. This is a fringe ideology, and I would bet that 100% of the people who say that they should be able to participate in sports have never participated in sports in their life in any meaningful fashion. 25 states have now imposed bans on them competing in schools. Even Gavin Newsom, pictured here as the villain in a Ryan Murphy production, recently said he thought trans athletes being allowed to participate in women's sports is deeply unfair, without really elaborating on what he meant by that. And that's a perfect example. If you've ever listened to Gavin Newsom, he sounds insane on a lot of topics, but for him to actually flip and get on the side of trans should not be able to compete in women's sports, that says a lot. That says that that's a losing proposition to try and argue for trans athletes to be included in female sports. And for trans kids impacted by these bans who just want to play sports with their friends, it's been hard, as this 15-year-old girl in New Hampshire explains.
It's been stressful and difficult. It's been annoying. I felt very annoyed and upset that this has been happening and that it's been happening towards a vulnerable community like the trans community.
And this is just basically meant to pull at your heartstrings, right? They put in one person who, to be quite honest, is probably not particularly happy. They look like they're obese, and I get it, right? You know, they just want to be accepted. I 100% remember when I was around this age, I had a lot of self-esteem issues, and so I get it, right? But it should not be at the expense. If there is a competitive component to the sport, your enjoyment should not be at the expense of females. And if, you know, there are tons of other leagues like rec leagues that you could join, or, you know, whatever, or groups, you don't need to participate in competitive sports. I'm sorry. And again, this is just to try and pull at your heartstrings, and there's no real other reason to include it other than that. Yeah, and honestly, annoying is an understatement there. Annoying is what you say when your friend is late, or your Wi-Fi is spotty, or when you're a chicken minding your own business and suddenly you're on the news. You're hanging out, eating dirty snow with 7 or 8 close friends, and then boom, all of a sudden, the AP is doing a close-up of your feet. That is annoying. But I know people have strong opinions on this subject. In our post-election show, I said there are vanishingly few trans girls competing in high school sports anywhere. And even if there were more, trans girls, like all kids, vary in athletic ability, and there is no evidence that they pose any threat to safety or fairness. That's kind of insane argument to make to me, because fairness is what I argue. Safety, yes, you know, I think there could be issues there, But the bigger issue is the fairness. And I don't even know how you could argue against that, because again, it takes a very, to the point I was making earlier, it takes a very small amount of people to have an outsized impact on the outcome in a competitive environment. After that show aired, J.K. Rowling herself issued the single longest tweet I've ever seen in my life, in which she claims, among other things, that I'm happy to watch females suffer injury, humiliation, and the loss of sporting opportunities to bolster an elitist postmodern ideology. And honestly, it feels a bit weird to catch that much heat from the creator of Harry Potter, especially when I clearly look like what would have happened if they just left him in that cupboard for the rest of his life. Now, I stand by everything I said in that episode, but I will concede that this subject is more complicated than people should just use the bathroom that corresponds with their gender identity. And since trans participation in sports seems, for some reason, to be at the center of politics right now, it felt like tonight might be a good time to talk about it at real length. And in doing so, we're going to try and explain a few things, what the facts can actually tell us about trans athletes regarding competition and safety, where much of this seems to be coming from because it didn't crop up out of nowhere, and where it looks like things might be going. And let's start by acknowledging many people do have good faith questions about this, even if they're asking them a little clumsily. Here was an example of one of those questions about fairness coming from a less than ideal source.
Let's say Serena's in her prime, and and who knows? We'll make up the person, right? So let's not make up the person. Let's say that Rafa Nadal, has some issue, or wants to transition and wins the Wimbledon final, or somebody wins the 100-meter dash at the Olympic. I think that's a net negative.
Now, clearly, when it comes to questions of right and wrong in sports, Lance Armstrong might be the last person you'd call. This is a hilariously bad take. If you know anything about Lance Armstrong's situation, it's been memed forever now because it was quite a while ago that this happened. Everyone in the Tour de France was doping. So, again, classic misdirection, no context whatsoever. Like, if he is stripped, you have to go all the way down to like the 83rd participant or something for there to be a clean athlete that would have won. So, I think he's making a valid point, and the fact that he's just trying to create a loophole just because of who he is hilarious to me. I think it's completely incorrect. Just after the 1919 Chicago White Sox and the ear chunk that Mike Tyson bit off. But to be fair, I can see how at the most elite levels, an instantaneous switch like that would confer an advantage. It hasn't happened. That's completely incorrect, actually. If you look at Laurel Hubbard, she participated in the Olympics, and just a brief breakdown. World Championships 2017 Anaheim got a silver. Pacific Games 2019 gold. Commonwealth Championships 2017 Gold Coast gold. 2019 Apia gold as well. So for him to say that it hasn't affected anyone is a complete joke and is falsifiably proven falsifiable right here. And for what it's worth, in tennis, the WTA already has guidelines for trans inclusion requiring male athletes maintain strict hormone levels for at least 2 years before competing, with processes for dispute resolution if necessary. So they're already thinking about this, and I presume will come to do that. The thing is, hypotheticals like that circulate constantly and often center around someone transitioning solely to gain a competitive advantage. But, as the trans researcher points out, that is an absurd proposition.
Trans women don't transition for sports. No one has ever said, oh yeah, I think I'd like to be a woman so I can do well in women's sports. When you go through a gender transition...
This is completely incorrect. You can't say what's in someone's mind and why they're doing something. This is a fallacy. Yes, you might not do that for that reason, but that doesn't mean that someone doesn't have a mental illness and they decide, okay, well, I'm not completely unremarkable, right, to even be able to participate at this high of a level, to make it your job, or, to be able to do it at a national level is impressive, right? But to go from completely unremarkable as a man to getting gold medals as a female, again, can you imagine that one person in the world would do that? Okay, then you can't make conjecture about someone's mindset about why they're doing this, especially when the net that is cast for what is trans is so large. For instance, some people believe that you can still be fully intact. You can still have a girlfriend. You can still whatever and be considered a female in some groups. And to me, that's just insane. That's a mental illness, or it's someone trying to take advantage of the system. And again, what is considered acceptable is way too large. It's not defined. And at the end of the day, I just think it's completely unfair. And you can't say what's in someone's mind and why they're doing something.
You lose so many things in life. My own mother said she never wanted to speak to me again. I lost friends, family, got divorced. You'd go through all of that just to win a medal in sports? No. Trans people transition because it's the only way that we can live happily.
And this is just a random one-off interview. Who is this person? Did they participate in sports before? Are they participating in sports now? I'm guessing by her, I'll call her because I'll try and be respectful. I'll call you whatever you want. But my issue is that you're way too old to be participating in sports at a competitive level anyway, just by your age. So you're not a credible expert on this topic at all. I place no faith in what your argument is. And again, you don't know what's in everyone else's mind. You may have just done it to be happy in your own skin, which more power to you. But at the end of the day, I'm not entertaining an argument that's based on someone who holds no stake in the issue. Right? No one says I'm going to transition just for the sake of sports. The same way no one says, could you please send me more messages about two-factor authentication? Or, when I walk down the aisle, I'd like a solo violin cover of Bar with the Bar by Kid Rock. That is just a made-up person. Still, let's engage with some of the underlying premises of that question from the world's most famous sports cheater. That those assigned male at birth are automatically going to have certain immutable physical advantages. That gets raised constantly, which is why we're going to spend most of our time talking about trans women and girls, even though in these 5 states, these bans impact trans boys in schools too. See, this is hilarious to me, this argument that there are no advantages that are gained, because, and I kind of mentioned it before, but I ran in community college, so for 2 years of my college life, and just on the team, there was a girl that was 1 year older than me, and she was one of the top, basically she could have won her events at the national level. So she was top, basically number 1 in the entire nation. for community colleges, and she was a year older than me. She never beat me once. We all trained together. She never beat me in one single rep. I was not a top ranked athlete in the nation. So performance, apples to apples, she blew me out of the water. I went to nationals my first year basically on a relay team, which is I basically got carried by other, basically one other athlete carried the three of us up to be able to go to nationals. We all did decently well, but none of us were good enough to qualify individually. So that puts me at decent. I was okay, but not great. And she was never able to beat me in a workout or race or anything. So again, to say that there's no difference, that she was never able to beat me, but again, versus female competitors, she was number one in the nation. It is insane to me that anyone would try and make this argument. All you have to do is look at that and look at any record book and look at the world record for males versus females, and this argument is completely just dumb. It makes no sense whatsoever. It is obviously true that on average cisgender men and post-pubescent boys have some specific athletic performance advantages, though the relative size of that advantage also depends on the sport and the event. In swimming, for instance, male athletic performance advantage is roughly 13% in the 50-meter freestyle, but less than 6% in the 1500-meter free, which is still clearly significant. And the other thing, this is just an awful argument, because if you look at the amount of people who fall in that 5%, even in that one niche, area, that one niche event, that's a huge amount of athletes. The amount of people that fall in the range of that 5% is just gigantic. And he's just basically writing that off and just saying, oh, it's a 5% increase. A 5% increase, especially in a longer event, is gigantic. And if I was 5% faster, I would have been running at D1 colleges. This is just an insane argument to even try and make. And obviously either he's being disingenuous or he has no idea what that actually looks like from an athlete's perspective. But in general, there's a lot of overlap in the average performance ranges of men and women. Basically, it's not the case that any man is going to be stronger or more athletic than any woman. And this is I hate this argument so much. I had this used on me about a year ago, and it drove me nuts. And it's, oh, well, if you tried to play Serena Williams, you would never beat her. Okay, but I'm not Federer. I'm not Nadal. I'm not a top tennis player in the world. So trying to compare an average person that has no, I played tennis as a child with my parents. Okay, that's not the same thing. You can't, that's apples and oranges. That's not even remotely, that's not the argument that we're making. And to try and fleece your argument in a misdirection is completely disingenuous and doesn't actually speak to what the problem is. Which is sometimes what gets implied here, including by Donald Trump, who brought Riley Gaines, the former college swimmer, who's become one of the most prominent voices on the issue, on stage to say this.
Just to show you how ridiculous it is, look at me. I'm much bigger and much stronger than her. There's no way she could beat me in swimming. Do we all agree?
Thank you.
To be honest, this just has to be a joke, right? He says insane stuff all the time just to get a reaction, but he knows, I know, you know, everyone knows that she would be able to beat him. He's an elderly man, and she is a recently graduated college athlete. Who knows if he's ever swam competitively in his life. Like, obviously, he would get defeated. He knows that. He's being hyperbolistic. This is kind of disingenuous here.
Thank you.
I don't agree, but I would like to see it. I would like to see the 78-year-old president try to swim in water against a former D1 swimmer. I'd like to bear witness to that event, and whatever happens after it is a result of it occurring. But crucially, when it comes to trans athletes who've medically transitioned, studies of cis athletes are not necessarily relevant. A lot of medical gender-affirming treatments, like hormone therapy, have a meaningful impact on body and hormone composition. So, the question then becomes, what do those impacts mean for athletic performance? We spoke to scientists on all sides of this issue, and the one thing that they actually agree on is that in part because the number of trans athletes is so small, the body of research specifically about them is extremely limited. The problem with this is that it's such a new phenomenon, and again, the reason why I think people are so upset about it is because it's an insane argument, and so people want to stop it from occurring more often, right? If you're impacted, just think about it, if you are a female going into a school and you had your scholarship position taken, right? Because there's only a limited amount of scholarships. You want to prevent that from happening to as many women as possible. So there's a financial incentive. There's now NIL money where it could come in where, oh yeah, hey, this gives my school the best chance to become the #1 program in the nation by allowing even just one male on it. Well, then what are we doing? Of course, you need to stop it before it becomes a runaway train and it is completely endemic to the entire program. That's what's so concerning, and that's why, yes, it is emergent that it's happening, but it needs to be shut down immediately. There are a bunch of studies comparing specific anatomical features like muscle mass in women who transition, but which don't directly speak to their impact on athletic performance. But we were only able to find 12 studies that actually tested trans adult women's physical fitness in a lab or other performance scenario. 8 have a sample size of less than 20, and 2 are of a single athlete. And look, I don't have any specific experience, even though I look like a cross between a scientist and the profoundly sick mice he's studying, but you probably shouldn't draw broad conclusions off a sample size of 1. Those 12 studies generally find that medically transitioning does impact trans women's performance, but disagree on how or by how much. The researcher you saw earlier actually published the only longitudinal study to date of multiple athletes studying the impact of transitioning on 8 long-distance runners. She found that after at least a year on hormone therapy, the race times turned out to be more athletically similar to those of cisgender women than cisgender men. But she herself will tell you the study was limited and its conclusions were nuanced. Here's the thing, there's so many variables to that. What is similar? What is the range? What is the age range? Right? All those things are going to play into it. And the problem with that is, and what is, again, there's a huge umbrella of what transgender is. Did they fully medically transition? Were they still intact? Like, what are we even talking about here? And again, this is just, there's so many variables here, and there's no citing of the actual numbers. Were they still at the top of the female performers? Were they completely off? Like, it's just, I don't know how anyone could use this as an actual argument. Here, she is explaining what we do and do not know at this point.
It is undoubtedly true that trans women will maintain advantages in some sports. Probably not so much in endurance sports, but in size and strength sports. Trans women will also have...
And here's the issue almost every sport that is not running, swimming, but even swimming that does require a lot of muscle mass, right? But bicycling, like outside of a few sports, almost every sport requires physicality. And I don't know, again, this is just so crazy that we're trying to make this point that, most sports are going to require physicality.
Some physiological disadvantages. Our larger frames are now being powered by reduced muscle mass and reduced aerobic capacity, and that can lead to disadvantages in terms like quickness, recovery, endurance, things that maybe aren't quite as obvious as being bigger and stronger.
Right, bigger and stronger bodies are not automatically advantage in every scenario. I mean, put The Rock in a pure bar class and see what happens. I mean, we know what would happen. He'd take a video of himself captioning it, "Mad respect to these mamas. Everyone go see Moana 2," and try to use it to sell his tequila before eating 13,000 pancakes and drinking a cow. We know what would happen. This is hilarious to me because even now, when I run, the bigger and stronger my body is in general, even my upper body where you wouldn't think it would impact, right? Well, now I have more core strength. Now I have, it just overall makes me faster. And pure bar isn't a competitive sport, so what are you even talking about? But again, this is just kind of a misdirection against the actual fact that if you are bigger and stronger on whole, you're going to perform better. And as an example, I have a friend that she started doing jiu-jitsu, and then her running times went off the charts to such a degree that she actually runs faster than I was at a point in time. And the hilarious thing about that is it's because she got much more muscular and bigger and stronger from jiu-jitsu. It's basically a side effect from that then transferred onto her running ability as well. But the degree of difference here matters because we would expect a certain amount of difference in athletics. Taller basketball players are expected to compete against shorter ones. Faster soccer players compete against slower ones. Michael Phelps was allowed to compete with other swimmers despite being part dolphin. And crucially, none of the studies I've mentioned so far bear much relevance to what these new laws target, which is youth sports, usually of all ages. And the research there is even more scant. We have no research about how being trans or undergoing gender-affirming treatment impacts athletic performance in teens. Why are there trans children at all? This is insanely troubling to me, just at the base level, because you can't even say what your sexual identity is in my opinion, before you go through puberty. And the issue with this is you don't even, just because you like something that's not considered traditionally male or female, doesn't mean that you're a male or female, respective. It just means you have an interest in something that's not traditionally a boy toy or a girl toy. And so to try and base the entire, oh yeah, my kid is trans. No, they're not. No, they're not. And for you to reinforce it and tell your kid that they're trans, children are so impressionable. I remember even when I was in grade school or, well, more in middle school, in high school, I would have my friends constantly joke around that I liked someone, and then I ended up liking them. I had no interest in them whatsoever to begin with, but because I kept hearing it over and over, and because it was the norms of my friend group, that this was what they were saying, well, then I fell into, actually liking that person. If you don't think that can happen across every single spectrum, you are out of your mind and you have no idea what children are actually like. So to even try and make the argument that children are able to fully form their idea about what trans is, I mean, just look at it from the point of, do we allow children to get tattoos? Do we allow them to smoke and drink and smoke weed and do all these things? Or do we allow them to vote? Do we allow them to go into the military? there's a reason why there is a bar set at 18 years old for most of those things. And the thing is that you cannot make up your mind before that. And so to try and say that they can identify as trans, and we'll follow this fully through, we'll follow the full logic here. They can identify as trans, undergo medical transitions, and then compete in sports is just insane to me. Why are you letting them fundamentally change their body in a way that will impact them for the rest of their life when they are under 18 years old? I don't know who would ever agree to this. I think any parent or anyone who is trying to promote this has completely lost the thread and should be kept as far away from children as possible. And when it comes to kids before the onset of puberty, I could talk about the studies showing the subtle performance differences between boys and girls, but I'd argue when you're talking about 7-year-olds as a practical matter, that's a point where lots of school sports are co-ed anyway, and a key difference between competitors on a field can come down to whether a kid was born in October or April. So then why are we even arguing about this? If they're co-ed anyway, and I do, I can, again, think back to when I was in school. Yeah, a lot of this stuff was co-ed because it didn't matter. There was no competition going on. And another thing to point out is, why do we have Title IX in the first place? Because there are differences between men and women, and you can't argue it. Then why not destroy Title IX and just have one co-ed league for everything? That's literally what you're arguing for here. And so that's just the one thing that I would always like to ask these types of people that make these arguments is, why are we doing it in the first place? Why are we to just abolish Title IX then, and then we can just see one league, and when it's 100% males that are participating in every sport, you can tell me how fair that is. And at this point, you might be saying, well, I don't need to wait for scientific research. This is all common sense, and I know what I've seen online. But a lot of what you've seen may not be quite what you think it is, both when it comes to trans athletes' impact on competition and safety. And let's start with the competition.
Listen to this. A shocking report from the United Nations states over 600 female athletes have lost close to 900 medals to transgender opponents.
Female athletes have lost nearly 900 medals to transgender athletes.
You had the United Nations study come out not long ago about 900 medals for females that ended up going to transgender athletes.
Yeah, 900 medals. That is a go-to statistic. It was even cited on the floor of the Senate during the debate over a trans sports ban and featured prominently in J.K. Rowling's latest tome. But we got curious about that number, so we looked at the report, and it turns out, first, it wasn't produced by the UN, it was submitted to it by a special rapporteur who herself said that its findings do not necessarily represent those of the UN. And if you were to go online to the footnotes that it cites and click on it, you get sent to this website, She Won, where anyone can submit an instance of a cis woman losing to a trans woman anywhere in the world in any competition, big or small. The author of that report insisted to us, I did not rely only on this source, but I will say the numbers she cites do match what was on the site back then. And they included competitions all the way back to 2001 and down to the level of a fun run in Topeka, Kansas, an Irish dance competition, as well as activities where gender confers no advantage, like poker. That's kind of silly because, I don't know if it's correlation or causation, but if you look at the World Series of Poker, I think the outstanding amount of people who win it are male. So, again, correlation or causation, obviously there are many more people who participate in it that are male, but the top woman isn't winning it every single year. So, okay, sure. Also, over 100 entries on this list are in the field of disc golf, which, if you're unfamiliar, involves frisbees being thrown into this thing, some kind of Guantanamo for birds. And as if that weren't enough, the way that they got to that 900 number has to do with how they counted the wins, because on a list, one trans woman finishing first counts as 3 denied medals. The logic being that the second place finisher should have come in first, the third place finisher should have come in second, and the fourth place finisher should have come in third. And on this, I actually do agree with his point, because you're doing yourself a disservice when you're misquoting the numbers, right? And if someone like Jon Stewart or whoever did the research for this segment, when they find this out and they can highlight it, it makes your case in your argument look significantly worse. And same thing with and I know I had the point about the poker, but when you're including a bunch of sports that just were kind of silly, or, Irish dance, I mean, yes, I think it does still highlight the issue that it's upsetting when you lose to someone if you view it as you're disadvantaged because of their ability, right? Because if someone can jump higher, or they can, whatever. I don't know what the criteria is for Irish dance, but in any sport, if you get beat by someone who you interpret to have an unfair advantage, it just doesn't feel good, right? So it's kind of I'm back and forth on it, but my general belief is that unless there is a serious outcome where you are losing something or it's higher profile, those should probably be left out, because the problem is that it can then discredit your entire movement. And I think the logic is on the side of men not being able to compete in women's sports. And so anything you do that goes against that or harms that should not be relied upon. And look, some will argue it shouldn't matter how minor the competition. The women on that list were unfairly deprived of their right place. But even some of those women don't feel that way. This one, a disc golfer, has publicly stated she's happy to see trans people in disc golf, and an amateur cyclist named Kristen Chalmers is actually on the list twice, because for some reason a single race she lost is under 2 different spellings of her name. She came in third behind 2 trans women, but she has made it clear they are her friends and she has no problem competing with them.
I think that it would be ridiculous to say that my life is being ruined by getting third in this. It would be ridiculous to...
And this is kind of hilarious. What level is this? Is this just fun riding? Yes, it's scored. Like, for instance, if I do a turkey trot and I finish 5th, that is completely different than something where money, endorsements, college tuitions, these sorts of things are on the line. And so, what is this event? What is the outcome of her coming in third versus first? Is there any impact at all? I feel like she would have a little bit more to say about this if she was impacted financially at the end of the day.
Sacrifice other people getting to have fun in a sport that they love on the weekends so that I could say I was the state champion.
And just by what she said there, something that they love to do on the weekends, it's not that serious of a level of competition. So again, it to me is just a poor argument, and they're just cherry picking something that has very little impact in general. Yeah, you can tell she's not upset because A, she's giggling through the whole interview, and B, that is a very happy looking photo. I have, and this is true, never once smiled that freely in my entire life. Look how joyful they are. That looks like an ad for cycling or having friends or honestly just for mud. So for all the talk of how trans women are so dominant they will spell the end of women's sports, the number that people keep citing to prove that has, I would argue, a pretty big thumb on the scale. And even the famous individual cases are sometimes missing a lot of context. You may have seen this photo of two trans high schoolers running in Connecticut, coming in first and second in a state track meet. They were the subject of a lawsuit claiming, among other things, their participation wasn't just unfair, it threatened to deprive their competitors of scholarships. You should know, one of the plaintiffs actually beat those girls twice just 2 days after the suit was filed. Also, most of the plaintiffs ended up getting scholarships while these two did not. And this is a very poor argument because just because it hasn't happened yet doesn't mean that it's not possibly going to happen in the future. And I think, again, that's why people are so concerned about it, is because it needs to be taken care of before it spirals out of control. And the second that you give the green light onto it, well, now you can go to college for free or at a heavily reduced rate. With the price of how college is going, there's all the incentive in the world to do this. But the most famous example is probably Leah Thomas. As you probably know, she's a swimmer who initially competed on the University of Pennsylvania men's team, including 1 year while undergoing hormone therapy. As part of her medical transition, as per the NCAA's rules at the time. She made national headlines after she won the NCAA championship in the women's 500 freestyle. She got a good time in that race, her best of the season, although it was also a full 9 seconds behind the record set by Katie Ledecky. Holy smokes. Okay, so we're comparing Leah Thomas to someone who has Olympic gold medals. Can we think about that for a second? Just because a male that was completely pedestrian and wins gold in the NCAA, I'm not even going to be generous in this one because my understanding is he is still intact, still had a girlfriend, and this is kind of what I was referring to earlier. This is literally the person who comes to my mind in how unfair it is and the giant umbrella that is what is accepted as a trans person. Just because he was not able to beat a gold medalist doesn't mean that he's had a huge impact on the females that he's competing against. It's also the only place she won at that meet. She came in 8th at the 100 freestyle, and in what was weirdly her most consequential race, she tied for 5th in the 200 free with Riley Gaines, who catapulted into conservative stardom off the back of that race. And I will let Riley herself tell the story of how Leah Thomas and the NCAA wronged her. And just before we go on, I'm going to make a point really quick. So if you're looking at this, and this is the point that I want to bring up, is that Thomas was nationally ranked 462nd in the NCAA men's official swimming competitions. After transitioning, Thomas jumped to number 1 in the NCAA women's category. So to say that there's no impact whatsoever, and again, this goes back to the previous point where there is an advantage conferred in this. How do you go from 462nd to 1st? That just doesn't add up. And it's completely disingenuous to bring up even, 462nd to 8th, 462nd to 5th. These numbers are not going to be achievable as a man competing against men. He did not work hard enough in 1 year to go from 462nd to 1st. That's not physically possible.
I look up at the board. Before I even looked at my name, I looked at Thomas's name. And I saw the number 5. And I looked beside my name, and there's a 5. The NCAA official looks at Thomas and myself and says, "Great job. But you guys tied, and we only have 1 trophy. So we're gonna give this trophy to Leah."
Thomas held the trophy for 5th place. Gaines held the one for 6th.
They told me when pictures were being taken, Thomas had to have the trophy, which just reduced it down to a photo op. I felt so belittled. I felt so betrayed.
Okay, so a few things there. First, That's a story about how Leah Thomas prevented Riley Gaines from getting 5th place instead of 5th place. Second, those trophies look absolutely identical. You're just exposing that you've never actually competed in sports. To get to this level as a D1 swimmer and be at the top in the nation, you have to be insanely driven. The amount of dedication that it takes for you to get to this point is off the charts. And so for you to basically, I guarantee you on that trophy, it said 6th. And if they they printed another one, they created it, they sent it to her, and this was just for the photo. Okay, that is a little bit better, but even in this instance, why did they choose Leah Thomas over Riley Gaines? And that would drive, again, the competitive nature of someone to get to this level, that would drive them up the wall. And to see someone who waltzed in from being 462nd now to 5th, I mean, how is that fair? Even in the remotest ideological beliefs. Again, this is kind of a fault. Oh, boo-hoo. You don't have the mindset of a professional athlete. It's nice for you sitting here having your TV show, but you don't understand what it takes. And there's someone I knew who was participating in long jump in the Olympics. And I remember I said to him one time, "Oh man, that's so great that you even got to go." And his response back to me was, "If you think that way, you're not going to the Olympics." So, and that was, that's kind of a mind-blowing response that, I've never been there. And that explains why, is because that's not what my mindset was, that I was the best and I'm going to defeat everyone. I'm going to do everything in my power to be the best that I can be at this sport. Again, this is just a trivialization of that. And I think it's kind of disgusting, actually, because of the amount of effort that you have to put in to be able to achieve at this level. Third, yes, it was a photo op in the sense that everybody arranged themselves for the purpose of taking a photo. And while we're talking about photo ops, I don't know, man. You're on the stage at CPAC, so an objectively drownable man could announce that he could beat you in a race. That's about as photo op-y as it's ever gonna get. And she wouldn't have been if there wasn't the insanity around allowing trans people to compete against women in sports. So she wouldn't even be up there if it wasn't for that, and made into the spokeswoman for it if it was not a compelling argument. So there you are. So just so we are all clear, Leah Thomas didn't take anything from Riley Gaines. If anything, you could argue she gave a lot to her, as Gaines later decided to forego dental school in order to be an activist and a speaker. She now has her own advocacy center and has personally lobbied multiple state legislatures for bans, all to address the threat of women's sports by a woman who swam exactly as fast as she did to the literal 100th of a second. So from 900 medals to the scholarships these girls did not get, to the most famous 5th place finisher in human history, the competition argument is already a lot weaker than it tends to get presented. So what about safety? Well, first, in plenty of sports like track and swimming, there's no safety threat because they're not contact sports. But in others, like basketball and volleyball, there clearly is some amount of contact, either with another body part or with the ball. But even there, big anecdotes that get thrown around tend to be more complicated. The most famous example concerns Peyton McNabb, a 3-sport high school athlete who was hit in the face by a spike during a volleyball match. She suffered injuries, including a concussion, and started speaking out against the policies that allowed the trans player who spiked the ball to play. The video of her getting hit often makes the rounds in these debates, and she told her story to the North Carolina State Legislature before they implemented their ban. She also attended Trump's address to Congress and appeared in a video about the incident produced by an activist group for which she and Riley Gaines are now ambassadors.
A couple years ago, I was severely injured in a high school volleyball game by a male on the opposing team, leaving me with permanent injuries that the doctors don't know if I'll ever be able to recover from. Because of my career-ending injury, I was no longer able to perform the way I had in the past. Progressive gender ideology being pushed so harshly is exactly the root of why this was allowed to happen to me. If it wasn't pushed so harshly, this could have been 100% avoided.
Okay, I'll say this. Unlike holding up a trophy with a 6 on it for 40 seconds, a concussion is genuinely traumatic. Though, for what it's worth, she did go on to play softball in the spring and did pretty well, judging by her school posting this image about her making the all-conference team and a local paper pointing out she helped her team to a 5-0 start. And the other thing I would point out about that is that this is at the high school level. So as men or boys continue on, this becomes a greater threat. And I'm not even making the argument, my argument is more around fairness. But if you want to talk about the threat to females, I mean, you can't not acknowledge that. You have to acknowledge the fact that as this goes on, it becomes more and more of a threat of females becoming injured by males participating in their sport. And I'm not saying she wasn't injured or that it didn't have some impact on her performance, but a lot of the groups heavily pushing this story seem to be overselling it, including choosing to title a video "The Kill Shot," how Peyton McNabb turned tragedy into triumph, because Kill Shot is not a good title for a teenage girl who is very much alive and talking into a camera. This just shows his ignorance to the sport. If you know anything about volleyball, which I don't even know that much, kill shot is the shot that was taken, and then it's just obviously parlayed into the name of this documentary or whatever it is. So again, it's just the name of the actual shot was when he went up and spiked it and she got hit in the face. That's a kill shot. So completely disingenuous in how he's framing this, but good on you. Kill Shot is either a movie where Keanu Reeves and Ana de Armas, posing as spies and devastating marksmen, fall into love, or a hunting reality show that gets canceled after its host, Donald Trump Jr., is mauled by a moose in heat. And that is not the only volleyball-related story that's been oversold. Last year, there was a controversy over a trans player for San Jose State University. The other teams forfeited their games rather than compete with her, and one of her own teammates joined a lawsuit to stop her from playing. But watch as this story mentions something at the end that puts a bit of an asterisk on that teammate's argument.
When asked about how and why she felt unsafe, Schlesser said,
"The height that the person can jump is so much higher, and honestly higher for a man. It's insane. And then the strength behind the ball when they're swinging is also just so much more powerful."
But her transgender teammates' stats don't appear to give the Spartans a dramatic upper hand. The San Jose State women's volleyball team is ranked 119th nationally.
Could you tell me what they were ranked before they got the transgender athlete? So, yeah, okay, they're not great, but that's because it's not a great school. And again, if you translate, he may not have even have been able to get on a male volleyball team. And now, since he transitioned, now he's able to go ahead and be on the female team. Again, how did they perform the year before? How are they performing now? This is just a Again, misdirection. Wow! You must be in a very competitive league, since it sounds like you've got one of the Avengers on your team, and yet somehow you still only ranked 119th. Also, one person is not a team. And you can't guarantee that the transgender athlete would be able to touch the ball on every single set. So, again, on a team sport where there are still 5 other women on the court with you, yeah, it's not going to have as much of an impact. But, I mean, that's just not a good reason to argue for the inclusion of trans in sports with females. That lawsuit initially claimed that the player's spikes were estimated to be traveling upwards of 80 miles per hour, a speed, by the way, that would make her as powerful as some of the hardest hitting men's volleyball players in history. But when ESPN used camera calibration software to analyze the video of 5 of her spikes, including ones that went viral for being dangerous, they averaged around 50.6 miles an hour, which is fast, but also a full speed limit in the suburbs, lower than what the lawsuit initially claimed. Okay, but what are the females hitting at? Again, you're completely leaving out half of the equation. And look, they've since amended that lawsuit, deleting the 80 miles per hour line, telling us that it was a mistake and that they meant to say 60 instead. Though, notably, they only did that after ESPN published its report. The point is, her spikes were nowhere near record-setting, which may be why she didn't rank in the top 150 in hitting percentage in the NCAA. But where would she fall as a male competitor? Again, it's not even the danger to females that I'm arguing, which is still an argument. It's how fair is this? Where was the team before she was on it? Where is it now? Who got left out of getting a scholarship because of this person? And look, some trans kids are going to injure their opponents the same way any kid will. And concussions are horrible, although they're also not that uncommon in youth sports, given between 1 to 2 million of them happen every year. Even in the wake of Peyton McNabb's injury, 2 coaches whose team had played against the trans player for the previous 4 years spoke up at a school board meeting to say they were happy to keep doing so. One apparently told the meeting every time a student plays, there is an inherent risk of injury, and that she'd seen cis girls hit by the ball harder than the one in the video. And the other coach asked, if they are slated to play the team with a player who is 100% girl, and this player hits the ball harder than the player in question, should that game be forfeited? And that's the thing. The standard can't be no trans kid ever injures someone, because that's an impossible standard. And yes, if trans kids were injuring cis kids at much higher rates, then we could have safety concerns to address. But there's no evidence that's the case. And at this point, it's worth asking, what is really behind all this vitriol? Because again, I do believe that some speaking against trans participation are just talking about women's sports. And the truth is, at the elite levels of competition, this isn't a cut and dry issue. But in many other cases, the opposition comes from a much more toxic place. It is not just about denying trans women the right to play, it's about denying them the right to exist. Mike Johnson basically said as much after the House passed its ban on trans athletes when he said this.
We know from scripture and from nature that men are men and women are women, and men cannot become women.
That's right, Mike. As scripture tells us, men are men and women are women, and God is his own son, and some mothers are virgins. Again, this is kind of a red herring. Just because they took something one person said does not invalidate the entire argument that trans should not be participating in women's sports. and some mothers-in-law are pillars of salt, and some daughters are sex partners, and colorful coats are for dream tellers, and brothers are murderers, but also brothers are backup husbands for wives, and babies can be split in half, and water is wine, and also with you. Sorry, and with your spirit. To be fair, that's a pretty funny, and this is why I like John Oliver back in the day, is like, some of the writing for it is actually pretty funny, right? I've kind of laughed at a few of the jokes that he's made, but, you know, if you're trying to actually break it down and take a look at his argument, okay, not so compelling then. But this is objectively funny. Now, the anti-inclusion camp objects to being called hateful, bigoted, or intolerant, usually right before or after saying something most would consider qualifies. Here is Riley Gaines doing just that.
I don't want to be considered a bigot or a transphobe or all of those labels. There's no hate in my heart. But me, myself, personally, I don't actually think this person is a woman. I don't actually think this person is a female. Therefore, when I say she, I feel like I'm going against my moral compass.
Yeah, but it turns out there's a lot of distance between I don't want to be considered a transphobe and I don't want to be a transphobe. Even greater than the distance between you and first place in that race you make such a big deal about. All right, once again, we're gonna settle this. And I hate to do this because it is kind of crass, but Leah still has male body parts, still attracted to women. So just from a fairness perspective, he still has testosterone, he still has testicles. That infers an unfair advantage, just point blank. That's not even an argument. And then the other part of the argument that I would make that I haven't even touched on yet, some of Leah's teammates felt uncomfortable around Leah in the locker room due to her male genitalia. In what universe are we living? Why do we even have male and female bathrooms then? Why don't we just have one single, everyone goes to the bathroom in here? This is insane that not only is he still intact, but now he's changing with the other females, and they, to get in and out of swimsuits, have to get naked around each other. And it's even stated in the next line that he is still attracted to women. And he gets to see a team of women naked every single swim meet. How does this even, how my brain is broken at how stupid this argument truly is. What logic can you justify? And I've only attacked the fairness so far, but you are making other females uncomfortable because you have your whole male package out in front of them in the changing room. What are we doing here? What are we doing here? Holy. The thing is, this current uproar is rooted in a very intentional political strategy by the right to find a new issue after losing the war over same-sex marriage. Conservatives' embrace of this issue came after the failure of so-called bathroom bills around the country, which were widely criticized. The president of the American Principles Project, a socially conservative advocacy group, has openly said, "We pivoted to the sports issue. It's been wildly successful." He even explained the reason for that, arguing what it did was it got opponents of the LGBT movement comfortable with talking about transgender issues. And he's kind of right about that, because it does seem like right now you can basically say anything you want about trans people, as long as you tag on in sports after it. And here's my biggest argument against that, is because now you're impacting other people. And that's where I have an issue with it. I have no issue with trans people doing whatever they want. I'll call them whatever they want. Again, I don't care as long as it doesn't impact other people. That's why I'm using he pronouns for Leah Thomas, because he's still intact and he's competing against females. And he's subjecting other women to be in spaces that should be reserved for females only, but he's sneaking his way in there. How is that fair at all? And so again, as long as you're not impacting, this is just my base mindset, as long as you're not impacting other people, I don't care what you do. But when it does, that's where I draw the line. That's where it's no longer acceptable, and I think it needs to be completely disallowed from happening. I don't think trans women should be allowed in sports. I don't think trans women are women in sports. But it's noticeable just how fast the in sports part can drop off once people feel that permission has been granted. To the point that some leading voices in this movement are now circling back to bathroom bans, an issue that a decade ago people felt was a bridge too far. Last year, for instance, Peyton McNabb tweeted a video of her confronting a trans woman with the caption, "A man using the girls' bathroom at Western Carolina University." Unreal, which is really nasty. And for the record, ambushing strangers just minding their own business is not what a girls' bathrooms are for. Girls' bathrooms are for gassing each other up, making best friends in 30 seconds, complimenting tops, tucking in tags, and zipping up dresses, while one girl says, "Oh my god, that lipstick is so good on you." The other says, 30% off at Sephora right now. And the first girl says, "Like now?" And she responds, "Yeah, I went yesterday." Then she says, "Oh, you're my hero. I've been looking for a nude that goes with my blotchy skin tone." And the other says, "Girl, stop it. You would kill for those freckles." And, people are buying them now. And the first one's like, "You're right. We've got to be loving ourselves." And the other one's like, "We absolutely do. And that's what the girls' bathrooms are for, I'm told. I have no idea. Put your fucking phone away and build some community, Peyton." I mean, this one is a little bit more murky. My general thoughts on it is that if it's all stalls and they all have doors, I really don't have as much of an issue with it. Again, the Leah Thomas example is, if you've ever been in an athletic changing room, you can just walk around and it's open air. There's not like individual stalls where you can change and the rest of your teammate doesn't get to see your body. So it's just different, right? But then I also fall back to the point that why are there separate male and female restrooms, right? It's that way for a reason. So it's murky with the doors, as long as the trans person isn't trying to peep through the holes in the doors. Okay, I really have less of an issue with it. It's kind of a non-issue, but again, why is it separated in the first place? It was separated in the first place for a reason, and if you're allowing males into female spaces, why is it a female space in the first place? Why don't you just have one gender restrooms then? So it's literally history invalidates your argument on this. And I don't even disagree with your argument. Female bathrooms, there's stall doors, you do your thing behind a closed door, but again, it flies in the face of history, and you should be advocating for unisex bathrooms then, if you want to stay intellectually consistent. And the reason this has been an easy sell for the right is that it's possible to frame all of this as being about protecting women and girls. Although, if that is truly the aim, there is a reason for them to feel a lot less safe thanks to these bills. And in practice, they can encourage adults to police the bodies of literal children. That has happened in Florida, where a trans kid was kicked off a team after an investigation which resulted in a report about her that was more than 500 pages long and included investigators asking 3 girls on her volleyball team if they'd ever seen her undressed. And you don't find that an issue at all? I mean, they need to understand the impact. And again, as children, they should not be exposed to these types of things. I don't know how you can make this argument. And to his point of what they're doing with their body, yeah, you can't get tattoos without parental consent under the age of 18. So why would we let children modify their body? That's going to have even more lasting impacts. I knew someone who was like, I wish I didn't get a tattoo that I got when I was legally able to. So over the age of 18, they got a tattoo. I knew them when they were 26, and they were even regretful for that 8-year period whenever in that time frame they got their tattoo. It's stupid. I wish I didn't do it. You don't think there's going to be a regret from children younger than that when it completely not just has a superficial marking somewhere on their body, but can possibly not function as the gender that they were born later in life if they have regrets about something that they were possibly led into when they were a child. And in Utah, the parents of a girl who was not trans were horrified when a local member of the State Board of Education felt empowered to do this.
Utah State Board of Education member Natalie Klein posted this picture with the caption, "Girls basketball, ... The couple describes their daughter, whose image KSL is blurring, as a tomboy.
She cut her hair short because that's how she feels comfortable. She wears clothes that are a little baggy. She goes to the gym all the time, so she's got muscles.
They said their family is rallying around their daughter. They have a message to other families experiencing bullying.
And I want all the kids to know that it's okay to just be who they are.
That's just awful. That is awful. And what I would say, it should not happen at all. It makes the athlete feel worse. It's just not good in general. I think, and especially at such an age where most people are very insecure about themselves to begin with. But what I can tell you is that this can happen it happened even to me when I was younger. Not to this level, right? But even I was questioned, and I didn't care because whatever. I was young and I didn't even think about it. But because I'm tall and my mom got accused of me being older and playing against younger kids, which was absolutely not the case. So to say that this is unique, that parents are upset that another child is outperforming or doing better against their children because of a outlying factor. I mean, again, it's just a disingenuous argument because it happens. Again, it happened to me, and I'm not saying it's nearly as impactful as what they experienced, but to a lesser degree, it happened to me being accused that I was an older child just because I was taller. When in actuality, I was always the youngest one in all of my classes growing up. So being judged on physicality isn't something that's unique to this case. And I'll state for the third time that what she experienced in this instance is much more upsetting, I would imagine, because it's a way more harsh accusation than me being older. But at the same time, you can't try and claim that it doesn't happen on other basis other than accused transgenderism. And I hope it goes without saying, but random adults should not be publicly interrogating the gender of children on Facebook. People really shouldn't be on Facebook at all, unless they're A, locked in a bidding war for a barely used set of end tables, or B, trying to figure out if a family friend died, or if they're just intermittently posting about praying. Those are the only 2 acceptable uses of Facebook left. But obviously, the bulk of the damage here is being done to trans kids. Because one thing we know for sure is that for all kids, the benefits of physiological, social, and emotional of participating in school sports teams and athletics are wide-ranging. So then why don't they just participate against the sex that they were born as? Again, it is just farcical. Because you're not allowed to vote, why are you allowed to tell me what gender you are? And to hear trans kids themselves tell it, participation can be especially important to their feelings of community and sense of self.
I feel like I'm a part of a second family.
Can be especially important to their feeling of community and sense of self.
I love track because I feel like I'm a part of a second family. It's like another bond that you experience.
This has helped me so much. Being able to be part of a sport and part of a team is such an incredible, amazing experience for me.
Without football, I don't quite know if I would still be here, because it's given me a sense of belonging. It's taken away the spotlight on the fact that I am transgender, and it's just allowed me to be a boy, and it's allowed me to be a kid.
I'll just say this, female to male, I actually don't really have any problem with. I view that as a much fairer battleground than male to female, for a litany of reasons, mostly medical. Yes, there is going to be some sort of testosterone injection, but it's not the same as a male going through puberty and then transitioning and keeping all the benefits of going through male puberty. It's not the same argument. All right, well, I'm going to cut it a bit short there. Obviously, the video is getting pretty long here, and I think I've adequately addressed most of the major points that are made about trying to allow transgender into sports. Again, I realize that I come at it from a competitive angle and what I think is fair for the athletes. So my viewpoint might be a little bit different from yours. I think it would be great for transgender athletes if there were leagues that were made available, whether it be a co-ed league or even possibly a transgender league. Obviously, the barrier for that would be the amount of people who are transgender. There's very few of them, so it'd be very challenging to create an entire league comprised of them. So let me know what your thoughts are on the matter. Drop a comment down below on what you think the most fair way to address this issue would be. And I would really appreciate it if you could drop a subscription as well. It really helps out the channel, and I'm trying to grow the community. Thank you once again for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.